What was the defining moment when you knew that your business had real potential?
At the time, we didn't have so many competitors. Under 500's journey was pretty early in the healthy food space as a standalone restaurant. Our competition back then was names like Heat and Subway. Subway, we know today, is not as healthy as we all think.
Mahmoud Bartawi, founder of Under 500, turned a personal problem into a multi-market disruption using grit, micro-influencers, and pure hustle. He didn't just build a healthy food brand, he built a movement.
There's different ways of answering that, but we started Lovin Dubai in September 2015, and there was 250,000 page views in the first month, and that was different.
Richard Fitzgerald, the force behind Lovin Dubai, turned a blog into a media powerhouse, redefining how the Middle East consumes content. He walked away from the corporate spotlight to build something of his own, armed with nothing but a vision.
Were you starting from the perspective of, I'm gonna dip my toes in the water and see if this works? Or were you starting with a high conviction bet inside saying that, you know what, I know this now?
I felt that from the start, but I didn't know how it would work. Under Augustus Media, we didn't get revenue at the start, so I started running around with my phone just to pay the bills.
Honestly, I created my brand for me. If you are the consumer in your company, you're never going to give up because you're looking for that solution. You know, if your money runs out, you're willing to do things that don't have to do with money, those sleepless nights.
You know, now we're looking at buybacks and treasury shares and all sorts of stuff. You know, last year we did $12 million and 2.5 million EBITDA. Solid business.
How long did it take for you to make under 500 profit?
It would be crazy if I told you we were profitable. Yeah, I remember thinking we either close now or we raise the money. That's it.
For the aspiring entrepreneurs who are watching us right now, what would your advice be to them?
Don't take advice from someone who hasn't done the thing that you want to do already.
What do you want to do? Do you want to come up with a big idea? Okay, come on, anyone can do that. If you want to run a big company.
They played the long game, they broke the rules, and they bet everything to build empires from nothing. What came next? No one saw coming. This is beyond possible.
What was the defining moment when you knew that your business had real potential?
I guess the defining moment was, it was actually a food tasting I had at my house, and I had invited some of my friends over. I remember them tasting it and saying, yuck, no one's going to like healthy. Why are you doing this? Save your money. I looked at my business co-founder and said, we're going to have to either change the product or change the people that are testing the product. So we decided that none of the people that were testing the product were actually part of the target market. You see, none of my friends were going to the gym at the time. So we called personal trainers and invited them to my house. And then we did the food tasting again. One of them said, wow, this tastes so much better than a meal plan. All the personal trainers back then were on meal plans. And to them, this was, you know, if you look at a funnel and a bottom of the funnel is a meal plan where you need a long-term commitment to be able to get healthy. Here, under 500 was just the top of the funnel where you could have one meal to become healthy. So those personal trainers took each meal, tried it, and said, wow, if I can order this on my own, this can be my cheat meal. And Under 500 started as a healthy food brand that would serve personal trainers and people that were into healthy that just wanted the top of the funnel experience one time without having to go into a full meal plan. At the time, we didn't have so many competitors. So Under 500's journey was pretty early in the healthy food space as a standalone restaurant. Our competition back then was names like Heat and Subway. Subway, we know today, is not as healthy as we all think. But back then, that was the trending healthy food brand. And, you know, we basically had to get food that was tastier and better than the competition. I remember sitting down in Heat restaurant one day, trying the food and saying, you know, let me try to franchise this brand. And I actually approached the owner and said, look, I want to franchise your location. I'll take it somewhere far away like Mardif, and, you know, it's not going to compete with your business. They didn't really want to work with me because I didn't have experience. So I ended up franchising a non-healthy food brand called German Doner Kebab. I franchised that for a year. I was their first franchisee, got the experience, gave it back to the owner at the break-even price, and then took that experience and looked for someone to join me. I got lucky to meet my co-founder, who was an Egyptian Christian guy called Fadi. He studied at the American University of Dubai. I had known him from back in the day. And I just went to him to work on the project together. And he said, look, I really want to work with you. You know, let's work together on this. I'll get rid of my agency. You have a full-time job. You can think about getting out of that, and let's do this together. And we took this brand to 6 countries. And that's kind of the origin of, how we started the brand.
Richard, when you reflect on your entrepreneurial journey, For you, what was that moment when you really felt like, this is something which has potential?
We started Lovin Dubai in September 2015, and there was 250,000 page views in the first month. And that was different than a normal blog that I would have done before. And, eventually we got it up to 3 million page views. And if we know anything about online, if you have audience, if you have traction, generally, you should be able to commercially make it viable. And it was that page views, it was that traction, it was that buzz. And then I knew we had something. I knew we had a market that needed digital content. I was working in a Business Central Towers, and I was with a Mindshare global part of WPP, part of Group Global Media Buying. And I wasn't passionate about the food industry or lifestyle or celebrity content or news. It wasn't my thing. Like, I'm more like sports content or business content. But I asked them, is this space, would Lovin Dubai work? And they were telling me on their media plans that no, it's saturated. You've got loads of lifestyle brands. You've got Time Out, What's On, Stylist, Shortlisted just launched. ITP have been around 15 years. Like, you've done all this content. And I was like, yeah, but they're not online. And they're like, oh, they are. I'm like, no, they're not. I counted how many digital posts they did a week, and it was 10. We did 10 a day from day one, and we haven't stopped. 10 years later, like literally we haven't stopped. We do minimum 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And now we have 22 Lovin cities across the region and 13 Smashi verticals. So we weren't reinventing anything, but when the ingredients worked, when the language, the location, the name, and the content worked, that's when I felt there was something there. The challenge then came to how to turn it into business. And that took guts of 2 more years, really, of trying to get that fit and persuade the market of this new branded content unit and where the budgets were coming from, educate the audience. And that was another challenge. That happened once the revenue really sort of was compounding. And once we had our business model, once we had our rate cards and our sales approach, and once we had all that, and when we started getting more relationships and we were getting the official licenses, that feeling of going, okay, cool, we know what we have now. And then we have a lot of audience, and then it compounds, and then you become a bit more defensible. You become more than a page, you become a brand. And I guess that early feeling though, of the audience and the traction and the comments and the engagement, I knew there was something there.
Were you starting from the perspective of, I'm going to dip my toes in the water and see if this works? Or were you starting with a high conviction bet inside saying that, you know what, I know this is going to happen?
I felt that from the start, but I didn't know how it would work. I wrote down at the time Augustus Media to become the modern media company of choice in the Middle East and North Africa. But I was taking different bets and still pivoting on stuff like that. But there was a conviction I could do it because I did it within organizations running social media departments across different countries. And I did have that inner conviction, but then you don't really know, like you have to tweak things, you have to sort of adjust along the way. Under Augustus Media, we didn't get revenue at the start. So I started running around with my phone, doing social media community management for Imbituda Mall and for Golden Mile Galleria and the Palm, just to pay the bills. And that was something that I'd left behind 10 years because I was a fancy social media director, regional head of social at Mindshare with a big office. I didn't do that anymore. I had 30 people doing that when I left my job. But I was doing this to bring in the 10, 15, 30, 40, 50,000 dirhams a month retainers. And the other attempt we had was to resell social media listening software from the UK in the market here. And we couldn't resell it. They gave us all the leads in the world and we couldn't do it. But the Lovin Dubai brand was there, that worked. But it still did take a while to get it into a business.
Wow, it's such a journey. So you have to go back 2 steps to be able to do the thing that you used to do before to generate that initial revenue. I think these are the golden moments that, they can't be replaced. I created my brand for me. I was the consumer and I was looking for an end product. I remember sitting down in one of these healthy food places and me thinking, this can't be good. This can't be the healthy food that I'm going to be eating. It was a small shop. The food wasn't good. And I thought to myself, something needs to be done. This can't be the healthy food. And when you ask somebody, they would say, oh, you must be sick if you're going to eat healthy food. But when I looked at trends, when I used to go to the UK or, Barcelona, I see everyone there eating healthy with all these healthy food brands. Yet we don't have a Dubai healthy food brand. So I was thinking, how can I get this food to me? And that was kind of why I decided to start the brand. So it's not about failing or not making it. I thought instead of cooking it at home, won't I bring the best chef I can find? I found an Italian chef. He was top. He came and said, Mahmoud, I'll make you the best burger or food that you want. I found a nutritionist, said, can you count calories? They said, yeah. put them in a room together. They fought it out. The brand is called Under 500. So we wanted each dish to be under 500 calories. He had to produce the best possible food. She had to cut down the calories. And that got me realizing that if we created a brand, my partner he was in branding, and he called it, we thought about all the different variations. And we thought if we created a name with a number like under 500, and calories is a universal and scientific thing. So if someone eats 500 calories 3 times a day, we could scale this because it's not cuisine specific. You don't, if you're in Argentina and you see under 500, it would work because you can have 30% of the dishes localized and 70% based on what was here. So the thinking was always, how do you create something universal? And then right away, when it clicked with us, we realized that we had something. We started buying the rights. We bought the rights to 80 countries, even though we had nothing. Just an idea. We bought the rights.
You're going all in, basically.
We went all in because we knew it's basically you have a funnel where you can get the best chef in each market to create that localized dish with a nutritionist. You're branding it on something that's, it's not a keto diet, it's not a fad, it's not Atkin, it's none of those things that come in and go out. It's scientific. If your average BMR is 1,800 and you eat 3 under 500s a day, you have to lose weight. And the customers, they came back, because they were losing weight. We didn't need to market too much. That's what solved my problem. And then when it solved my problem, I realized if you're the consumer in your company, you're never going to give up because you're looking for that solution. If your money runs out, you're willing to do things that don't have to do with money, those sleepless nights that you run after your business and you do a delivery yourself because you don't have someone to do it. You can't afford it.
But there was a period of time when you had started off under 500, but you had your day job in the corporate world as well. Was that a safety net for you at that time?
It was a safety net. The company couldn't pay me anything. In all fairness, we had some savings and, we went all in. Me and my co-founder, Fadi, we decided that, he had something that he was doing. I had my job. Now, I have to also take a step back and, I can go into my job. I was the highest paid among all of my friends because I was into a sales role, working at top corporate banks, selling loans to people who already had money. I saw it like that. Everyone saw it like a hard job. I worked in the biggest bank, and the biggest bank merged with the other bank. Back then was NBD, merged with Emirates NBD. Because I spoke Arabic and English, they gave me an extra phone next to my desk, and the shareholders would call my phone to find out about what happened with their shares. So I got to know the top of the top, and I took these relationships with me each bank I went to. So when I was at that banking job doing my side hustle, the banking job didn't take much of my time. I already had those connections that I needed. I didn't need to go fish for new connections. So I didn't really need to be at my desk all the time. I always understood the relationship building side. So you got to be good at what you do, I think, for you to have a side hustle. Because if you're working overtime to do your main job, it might actually be, it might take away and then you might lose your main job.
Early on, it was you and your co-founder who were just funding the business. Richard, I want to ask you, did you bootstrap early on? Or did you go for funding right from the start?
A friend of mine had started Lovin Dublin, and we signed a 10-year area developer agreement with him in a franchise model where we paid a fixed fee, but it wasn't a known brand. So the benefit was that they had that sort of identity per se that we adopted locally, and it had a bit of tech, right? A kind of WordPress thing. So all I really had to do was do the content and the sales. But even still, we had bills because we were in Astrolabs and JLT, and it was a few thousand dirhams for the desks, and we couldn't afford the fancy desk. I remember moving in there and having to go back to the cheaper desks because I was trying to sort of break even. After I left Mindshare, I became MD of a tech company while doing this. So what I did, I got an NOC from the founder. It was a startup, and I hired an expensive editor and a salesperson on Lovin Dubai in September, and then equally at the weekends I was sort of like growth hacking it and stuff like that. But then by 1st of May the following year, I then dropped that and went in full time. So my brother put in $20,000 at the start, and I put in $20,000, and he had 10%, and I'd say 90, right? And then in the next sort of year, I ended up giving away another 15% for $120,000 because I couldn't get a high valuation because it was a franchise and it was a service business. So there was no pitch deck, there was no VC, there was no hope because it wasn't anything new. I was on a slippery slope, and if I didn't take those retainers, if I didn't get something to pay the bills, then I would have ended up keep giving away equity. I wasn't able to get loans. Now we're looking at buybacks and treasury shares and all sorts of stuff, but we broke even in about 18 months, and we paid dividends between on average 50% since 2017. Just like a listed company in the UAE, like they do 60-70%, and we reinvest the rest. And last year we did $12 million and 2.5 million EBITDA. It's a solid business. And this year, inshallah, we'll do $50 million. We're the first foreign-owned media company, 100% foreign-owned in Saudi Arabia in 2017. Now we're in Pakistan and we have platforms all over, but our offices are in Egypt. We have 50 people in Cairo. We have 3 offices in the UAE, in Ras Al Khaimah and Abu Dhabi in UAE, and in Qatar, in Doha, and in Riyadh. At the time, I still was franchising Lovin. So I was like, hang on, this isn't brilliant, right? Like I know media businesses like ITP do franchising, etc. And guys I knew at the time, Novora did Vogue, and then they lost it after 10 years and stuff like that because Condé Nast came in. So I knew there was a risk with the franchise. I knew, even though he was a friend, I knew if that ended up in other hands, which it did, I knew they could pull the rug. So just before the Corona, I bought out of the franchise. I got a good deal. They were a bit negligent on IP. We registered the IP to protect us and let them know. And they were a bit negligent on that. And then they were like, oh, okay. And they fired their CEO. And they were like, oh, you messed up here. Rich got a good deal. And we did. We got a good deal. We bought the whole thing we did a IP license assignment. Cost us $20,000 in legal fees, but it just protected us. It's not something that will interest global investors who want to roll the Lovin brand, but it'll help me fulfill the mission here and pay no more fees. At one point, I needed a new brand, and I saw a streaming service in the US, and I said, why don't I do something like that? Create our own IP. That's where Smashi TV came from. And then I was like, oh, I'm doing streaming. I need money. And I went to look for investors, couldn't get it. And in the end, that again forced us to make streaming profitable without money. Like we made Smashi profitable through Snapchat shows in Arabic for the Saudi market. We had the biggest Snapchat shows in the world really at the time. That was really lucrative. That was bringing in close to $1 million a year. So that was covering the really cheap tech costs that we were doing on streaming. But even though this year we'll spend $7-8 million on a media company, to do that with fundraising, you're talking about Series B or something like that, and you're talking about giving away a good chunk of the business. So we're able to compete with people who raise funds now because we're profitable. So it's bootstrapping, but it's actually like you're still putting a lot of money into the business. But yeah, and you're still building as well, because it's not just services. Agencies is just services. We're building IP, we're building data, we're building tech.
But now that you're profitable, do global investors come your way?
And we're looking for a certain type of trajectory. We're looking for growth. Media companies want to grow their business, not yours. So when media companies try and acquire you, even if they tell you they'll give you autonomy and they'll take 20%, they don't want to. So who is the right partner right now? So I'm thinking like baby equity. We're not big enough for private equity. So do we need to acquire to merge? How do we get to $100 million revenue? What period can we go public with? Those sort of questions. So yeah.
Mahmoud, I want to hear from you as well. How long did it take for you to make under 500 profitable?
It would be crazy if I told you we were profitable, because we never took dividends. We just kept growing the company. We just kept growing. So my co-founder and I, we would fly to different countries trying to franchise our brand. I went to Kuwait, I went to Saudi, and I made a list of the top 10 agencies in each country to find influencers, because the way you market a healthy food brand is through influencers. I remember going to Saudi, meeting the top 3, Kuwait, top 3 agencies, and they said, look, you give us 15 to 20,000 dirhams a month, and we will give you a list of the top influencers here that are into fitness. I thought, okay, I can find them myself. You're not giving me anything. Number 2, I don't have any marketing money, and I'm still growing, because you're growing when the thing maybe most people don't know is when you're growing, you're actually reinvesting everything back in your business. You're trying to get there. So you're not really taking out money. You're putting money in. So I got to a stage where I needed now to pay in Kuwait and Saudi to the top 3 agencies, and in Dubai, that's about 60K a month in marketing. We were still small. We had 3 units. But we wanted to go to 3 countries. And how do you go to 3 countries? You need to secure your marketing first before you can deploy capital. So came back here, sat with the team. We thought if we had a list of these top influencers, we would need to pay them a lot of money to be able to actually work with them. So then the thinking became, what if you go and you make a list of all the people that go to gyms around the locations that you want to build, and you start with them a barter agreement. So we found something called micro-influencers, which was the agencies were not offering micro-influencers, and there was no platform. So we had to create our own. We found the top 3 locations we want to open in. We took 10 people that went and they were going to the gym and they tagged themselves in the gym who had 5 to 100,000 followers. Started with 20. We put all the money we had to be able to do a barter agreement with 20 people. So what it would look like is this influencer is on Instagram. He now is sitting down. He gets a message from under 500, clicks, get 20 free meals. You need to post each time. And we see if they post. If they don't post, we cut them off.
I love that.
Smart.
Brilliant.
20 people, and we had a plan for 200. So 200 had said, okay, we had money for 20. I remember thinking we either close now or we raise the money. That's it. So then we end up going to a company and saying, look, give us $1.5 million and we will create the biggest micro-influencer network that exists for this brand. And then this brand, obviously, we can, then we created gym food. So the thing people don't know is we actually had more than one healthy food brand. It's like Pampers and Huggies. One is a higher price. So how it worked is we were in Saudi, we had, a few units. We get a phone call saying, what does under 500 mean? Does it mean calories or does it mean riyal? So we said, why not use the 180 ingredients in the kitchen and just put a brown bag instead of the under 500 bag, the standard brown bag with a sticker, and call it gym food with a sticker of an arm. So you can't miss that. If you don't get that, you're not our customer. And we gave them a 30% discount. Same items. The guy in the kitchen, the chef, he doesn't need to create anything new. It's the same, it's just different menu, same ingredients. The way he makes it's almost the same, but it's in a different market where now the branding speaks to the person there. And that kind of, helped us get our valuation up. So again, did we take money? No, we ended up putting more money. And the person that actually gave us, a couple of $1 million to market in Kuwait and Saudi ended up, making an offer for the company. So one of the people that offered to buy the company was that group. So when someone sees you doing something out of the box, they kind of want to secure, they want to buy your whole entity because you're doing something that's different. Always when you don't have money, you innovate. When I was 13 years old, my father had a company, 5,000 employees. I go to my father's company and I remember getting there. This was the first time I go there. And I smell petrol in the air and oil. A man next to me says, we're in the factory. He gives me a broom. He says, Mahmoud, there's a spot over there. So I go and I start cleaning on the ground with this broom, and still remember on my fingernails, I had the dirt from the broom in my nails. And I turn around and I see my father standing and he taps me on the shoulder. At the time, my emotions, they turned from disappointment and anger into realization. I realized that it had to be this way if my father was looking at me. And he tapped on my shoulder and he said, Mahmoud, you will never run the top of a company if you don't start from the bottom. And all of this, my summer job to work in his company was because I made the mistake to ask my father for a motorbike. He said, you want a motorbike? You come every summer to my company, you do the summer job, you clean the ground, and you work your way up. And that's kind of, how I learned to make money. I realized there was no motorbike. I never got that motorbike. It never came to me.
That's such a powerful lesson. There is no motorbike. And one thing that I've also realized over time is that the most creative teams that I've worked with are not the ones that have an unlimited budget. It's actually the ones that are constrained. But I want to go back to some of your early days. What was the biggest challenge that you faced?
I think revenue was the hard part. Media is always fragmented. The social platforms are getting a lot of ad dollar. I think the business model is the hardest part. Print was declining. If you can't sell the actual magazine or the newspaper, then you have to sell advertising. How do you sell advertising when people don't really want to buy banner ads? And then how do you sell advertising on social media when social media are already selling ads? So the business model is hard. And then how do you sell subscription or merch? So I think the business model is the hardest. We sort of believed in like the idea of BuzzFeed and the native branded content unit. But then also as it went on, influencers were rising and clients were understanding that, okay, I can get lower funnel performance media on Facebook or whatever, but then there's another type of media that I need. As Mahmoud mentioned, what he's getting from the post by the person going to the gym in Kuwait or wherever is an endorsement, but it's also a different type of creative. It's not fixing a box of a piece of copy with a call to action to sell you lunch. It's more creative. So it's like a mini ad all the time. It's a mini awareness ad because it's selling a lifestyle. Where Lovin Dubai does well is that restaurants and F&B and events want us to come to their opening and they want us to take the reel or to take the video. And it's the same way that they want it from influencers. We've managed to do it in a way where we can do 17 shoots on one weekend, as we did a few weeks ago, across the UAE, because we have many employees. Another thing where we did it is that there is a bit of a trust thing with influencers when you're paying them money. This example on the under 500 is a barter, and that's a model that works, but often it's also a price for a post or price for a piece of content. But then, is the reach measurable? Do they do what you say? Do they get out of bed on time? Do they send you a report? And this is where the talent management agencies have come in. But we managed to put that under a media brand. And, I laugh sometimes where people say news can't make money. Well, who says it can't make money? They keep saying about brand safety and ad placements, fine, but that's kind of in an old website world. We're not in that world now. What I also find fascinating about revenue models, again, going back to the audience point, if you have an audience, you can monetize it. I think podcasting right now is in a very similar world to where Lovin Dubai was entering in the world of blogging. Back 10, 15 years ago, everyone had a blog. Everyone had blogger.com or wordsprouts.com. Or if your friend had a kid, they had a dad blog or a mummy blog or a fashion blog or a food blog. And then Instagram sort of at that lunch. And what I sort of think is happening now is everyone has a podcast. But what's eating the podcast lunch? TikTok. Most podcasts are created for vanity vertical video reels and TikToks. How does that world evolve? And how does the podcasting world evolve?
I want to actually frame this, because we're all kind of, if you're building a business, understanding the funnel, as you were mentioning, extremely important. If you're building a retail facing business right now, how do you diversify and how do you see the funnel? So where does the micro influencer KOL come in? Where does a Lovin Dubai come in? From your vantage point, what is the ideal funnel creation?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to disrespect people who've created brilliant retail businesses, because I haven't. And I think when we're talking about retail businesses, we can talk of many things like digital native vertical brands and things like that. The one thing I would say from a macro level, and I heard this analogy recently and I really like it, in the private sector, there are two things. There's communications and there's finance. There's capital and there's comms. Capital in the private sector is all real estate, because real estate needs capital. Everything else needs communications. A retail brand, chocolate, say Dubai chocolate, like Fix or say Gymshark, all these brands, they're for me retail, so they need comms. So you just have to understand from the start that you really are a comms, you really are a retail communications marketing company. And yes, there's product, and I get it. I get the food, I get the quality, I get that. But we also have product as well, but we have to be good at marketing. And then you have to just understand digital media, like paid, owned, and earned, and the relationship between paid, owned, and earned. And you have to understand what works for you and what your business model is, and the unit economics of content that marketing goes into, the ROI on the back of it. And then you can start answering those questions. And like, you do what you can at the start. So if the micro influencers accept barter and the big ones don't, well, then that answers your question.
Let's say that I have $100,000. How do I use Lovin Dubai versus or spreading it around 10 micro influencers?
You should sponsor content. You shouldn't do advertorials. If you really want to get the best out of Lovin Dubai and the best out of podcasts, but no one's brave enough to do that, especially when they need to create their own brand. Why do so many people make podcasts? Because they want their own voice heard. Why is Fasset spending to make a podcast? There's already podcasts out there. Sponsor one, because you get the voice of someone else. You get way more traction. But no one does this. Like, we've 21,000 clients on our database, and everyone wants their own reel. Everyone wants their own reel. And our team get frustrated. I'm like, guys, look, that's what they want. That's an advertorial. When you open the magazine and you see an ad written by a copywriter about Jaguar, and you say it's an ad, that's fine. Sponsored content is 13 ways to go off-roading in the UAE, brought to you by Jaguar. No one's brave enough to do that. Sorry if I'm disrespecting anyone, but they don't have sophisticated enough marketers in their company.
So you said everything's either real estate or marketing.
Capital or comms, yeah.
And in communications, where would you start if someone had $100,000? How would you spend that $100,000 on which kind of vertical? Like, to get into a new business. I'm starting a retail business. I have $100,000. Do I put all of it into finance, or do I put all of it into marketing? Or if it's into marketing, where in marketing?
But I go back to what you did, right? And I'm just going to second guess what you did. You decided, I'm going to do earned media. So I'm going to use free food. Then I'm going to do my own content. So I bet there was your own assets.
No, we give them, sorry to jump in. We said, look, you got to mention healthy food. You got to mention name of the brand. Make up your own story. Here's a discount code. If they buy through you, then you get...
Yeah, it's brilliant. So you do influencer marketing. You do your own content, and then you boosted when you had money, right? So those three things. When Gymshark launched, they went to all the big events in the UK, and they gave influencers free tank tops. So they used influencers, they promoted their own product, and then they boosted when they could. We do influencers, right? We interview all the local talents on the shows, and we also write about them all the time. And that's our one rule. When they have a product to launch, we'll talk about their product.
Even if it's for free.
Yeah. Say if Rashid Belhassa Money Kicks, if he has his store, because we have a long-term relationship with him. But if he does a deal with Cartier, we won't do that. They need to pay for it, right? So that's the influencer piece. The second thing is we promote our own lunch. We boost our own content. So 23 reasons to move to Dubai or to visit Dubai once before you die. If that's viral, that gets 10,000 page views. We'll top that up.
Should someone have made a deal with you, like to create that reel, or you'll create it, boost it, and then find someone to take it from you?
What happens is that they want to sell against your audience. They want to advertise against your audience. So what we do is we guarantee the views, even if it's their content. And even if
To your audience, you sell it.
Exactly.
And you boost it to your own audience.
to our own audience, if the algorithms aren't in our favor, but they already liked it, it's still our content. And we have a 10% COGS rule, cost of goods sold. So if we sell something for $5,000, we can spend $500 and still be margin.
So if what you're saying is true, I have $100,000, I want to start a clothing brand. I come to Lovin Dubai, I give you let's say $50,000. You give me $5,000 worth of spend. On my sale price, it's only 10%. Well, not everyone would buy, right?
Not everyone will buy it. And 90% of our revenue is branded content. So, and higher than normal staff ratio costs. Like we're at about 66% staff ratio cost. We should be about 50. I'm looking for other revenue models. Like I had an audience revenue model, which was the Snapchat revenue. At the height in 2021, that was 30% of our revenue. So we have a separate revenue model for that. So if we get viral views, the sales team at Snap and YouTube have already sold ads. So you get rev share. To get monetization at X, you have to get 5 million impressions over 3 months. So we have to work harder at doing native threads and engaging there. Instagram haven't rolled it out yet. TikTok are close. YouTube are the famous ones.
Where does the 100,000? Sorry, where should the 100,000 go on? Which platform? If you had 100,000 to spend on a new business, how would you you'd put it into which one?
I would make my own content a little bit, but I would do a strategy around brand personality, performance. So I would do a strategy around that, but I wouldn't be a content business. I would do 3 or 4 assets a month. I would do my hero assets. I wouldn't make a podcast. There's no business in the world that can support the unit economics of content on top. Like sales, HubSpot are closest to it. That's why they bought Hustle, but it still doesn't work.
Okay, you have these businesses in China. You have, for example, a factory, no retail store. In the factory, a small room, and you got an influencer and a bunch of products like these cameras, and the influencer keeps churning different products.
They don't work for the company. Have you seen the videos out of China recently? Have you seen the videos? Like it looks like homeless in San Francisco. They're underneath a bridge with a tent and a phone like this. The creator economy, they've gone wild. They don't own the company. The Trendyol and Temu and all these ones, they don't make their own content. Now, over time, eventually, like Shein would pay $50,000 to us to make really nice assets for Ramadan and a production shoot. Yes, but that's small. Like that's say 5 or 10% of the 100K. The rest is performance marketing and then some influencer branded content with Lovin Dubai or with influencers. So I would split it like that, and I would do it how you can and that way.
I'd love to get your perspective on a slightly different topic as well. So just going back to that early journey that we were talking about, tell us about the biggest mistake that you made.
If I had to start again, I would create a company where my shares would go to attract the best people around me. So we created a company with 2 people, and then later had to agree with each other, how many shares do we give away? Now, I know it sounds, why are you thinking about shares and you're just starting a company? But the fact is, if you want to get the best people, you need the right incentive. They need to see the right incentive. I know you might think, oh, it's 50-50, 2 people. But if you don't put aside that 10-15%, tomorrow when that thing grows, it's very hard to convince someone else that let's give up some of our meat to get someone else who's as good as us, because otherwise they would only care about the salary.
So it's about creating the right team.
Creating the right team. Factoring in that at some point you might meet someone that you need to, it took us such a long time to be able to agree to give someone else 5% of the company, who was our key guy. And how much salary would you pay someone? If you're doing a company, it means you have a certain value. You want to attract someone to love your company as much as you, they have to have skin in the game. It's never going to be an employee thinks that, like, there's always a defining thing. At the end of the day, one person pays a salary and the other person receives it. If you don't create it where you have a table with many people, you're always going to have that feeling. No matter what happens, no matter how many team meetings you do and you say we're all one team and everyone knows where they stand. Start with a base where you have an ability to attract people on this side, or at least give them the feeling, there's something called ESOPs, there's something called bonus shares. Why not start with that in mind? Now, I didn't have the experience back then. But I was lucky enough to have the experience to get a co-founder. I think that was, a lot of people think I want to be the only person doing something, but you realize later that this conversation you want to have, and you call, people say you talk about work too much, you're always working. If it's your co-founder, you don't have that problem because they're kind of with you on the side of the table. If it's someone else, then you're likely to lose that relationship, whether it's a friend, a girlfriend, they get annoyed, right?
But that's the other learning as well. Just having a great co-founder just goes such a long way. Question for both of you. In one sentence, describe your business.
We're kind of a youth-facing modern media company in our world.
I sold my business, so I'm, but I think wellness is important. I started the podcast to attract the best minds to share stories, for me to understand and to show the younger generation. My thinking was, when I started my business, I was going online and finding information about companies that were in the US, and then we would borrow those stories and try to relate. But when I was younger, if I saw an Emirati, talking about his business, bringing other people to talk, now I couldn't associate. People associate with people that are closer to them. Think about anything you've bought in your life. You probably buy it from the person that looks and talks the most like you. It's like a subconscious thing. It's like here, me, an Emirati, trying to sell properties to Russians. It would be very difficult because a Russian wants to buy from a Russian, right? So that's the way I think about it. I've been traditionally in sales jobs. I think the biggest limitation or the biggest mistake I see people making is that thinking that money is the problem. And I'll tell you why. I had work experience since I was 13. By the time I became, when I got my first job at the biggest bank in Dubai, I was 3 months into my job and I had this big book in front of me. And I opened this book and I started looking at it. And this was the bank's policy. And I right away found out, wait, I can buy a home. I can take a home loan instead of a car loan. So right away, I thought, I started flipping the pages, I read, and it was true. I took the phone, I started calling right away all the property developers and saying, guys, can I buy a property? Can I buy a property? And I found something that was new at the time called JBR. I called my father. I said, Baba, I'm going to buy a property. He said, Mahmoud, you don't have any money. You just started 3 months ago. I said, Baba, I have to put zero money. The bank is going to finance 100%. And that's, when it hit me, I ended up going to the head of HR. I convinced him that I wanted to buy this property. I held on to that property for 7 years, sold it. It made me a millionaire. I didn't need any money to become a millionaire. A lot of people have these golden opportunities in front of them. They're not looking at it. They think money is the problem. That was my realization. Money is not the problem. Money gets you to think outside the box. If you have money, you become complacent. So for me, my hard learnings were always when I hit my head on the wall and realized I have to look somewhere else. The money is not here. There's a mistake. How do I find the answer?
You both had a choice and you chose to build your business in the UAE, and how the ecosystem over here helped you with that.
If you look at the correlation of GDP growth over the last 40 years, like it's going faster here than the UK and the US compounding. It's just coming from a lower base. So UAE is a strong economy and it's a growing economy. I always compare the Gulf with the US and the rest of the region with LATAM. And I think we're first world in the Gulf. The modern Arab states are pretty first world in terms of their needs and the consumer products and the market and the prices. And so I think it's, people say opportunity and, I relate to a lot of stories Mahmoud said about food, but, what weren't here before and what's in other markets. But also the market's different. I was working and living in Dublin originally and then London, and I took a well-paid job over here. But then once I got here, I was traveling a lot across the region for work, and I just grew in love with the region more so than the UAE in particular, and that sort of Dubai lifestyle per se. And that sort of really sort of led me passionate to continue to grow Augustus Media across the region. But what Dubai does is it's got that capitalistic mindset and that sort of the Dubai dream, right? It does reward risk, but going back to some of the fundamentals, I think with business, you can make your own rules. Like business is the ultimate sport and you can play longer. I'd be retired by now in any sport, and I'm still playing business. So, my style is a little bit conservative. I take risks at the right points. I play long, and I definitely see myself more as an entrepreneur, more as an employee who's an entrepreneur. And I play long game and take some risks. We buy businesses, we fail, we pivot, but we don't really go all in. Yeah, we don't make big bets because it's our timeline. We can stretch it out. People say to me, hey, Rich, you could go a lot bigger, a lot faster if you raise $10 million now. And I'm like, no, I couldn't. I can't force Egypt to have 5G. It's just not there. I can't force piracy trends. I can't force, like Saudi, for example. Saudi should be a bigger market for us. We were there since 2017. Why is it not bigger for us? Because the SME market's not there. I need the giga projects to finish for the hotel to open in Qadiyah and Six Flags, for them to have a marketing budget to invite Lovin Riyadh over. It's not there. Look at the hotels that are needed to build in Riyadh by 2034. It's fascinating. What's happening in Daria and all these places is fascinating. They're my customers in the future. Sometimes in startup world and in VC world, we're taught zero-sum games and we're taught a winner, only winner. I don't really believe that. And that's fine. It means I'm not going to win as big as others. And that's okay. But I think by owning your own business, you have that sort of vehicle to do other things, and you have that stability per se. Obviously, we're not complacent and anything could happen, but we have that sort of stability of I invest now a good bit in like media tech stuff, separate under Fitzy Fund. I do all these things that allows me to have skin in the game in AI and all these other trends.
And I think the point around timing is such a valid one because, even if you think about Fasset's journey, if we'd been on this journey 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I don't know if that would have been the right time.
There are different schools of thought when it comes to raising venture. Part of it is the nature of your business, right? So I come from LA, and to be honest, have been taught very early on by not just in your university, but just friends who are becoming entrepreneurs around you, that you raise big early, you dominate the market, and then you expand before everyone else does. And I think for certain businesses, that still holds true. But I also hear your point that you cannot expedite what is actually happening fundamentally from an economy perspective. What I've come to know over the years, that it's really depending on what space you're playing and how borderless is your space. Because there are some technologies that are truly borderless, where you're not ring fenced by a market per se. And I think there, I do feel, because I come from a unique background because my parents are from Europe. I grew up in America, and there is a little bit of a divide there, right? Where from an American standpoint, you look at the world as kind of one unit, right? And you focus on technologies that, you're looking at a single market, and you raise early on, and you kind of put your fingerprints in a way where you have a large total addressable market from day one. But I've also kind of seen the other aspect of it is that we miss, as Americans, a lot of opportunities that are more right in front of you, that require playing long, as you said. And that cannot necessarily be expedited by venture.
You say Europe, you say LA, yet you're in Dubai with Fasset and your business. I'm interested to know, why in Dubai?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll tell you this. I mean, I got the good fortune of coming to Dubai in 1999 when my dad, who was working at Boeing at the time, was coming up setting up satellites here for Etisalat. And that's when I realized that Dubai is at the center of, and one of the things I found coming from big markets, we have a big business in Indonesia. And if you talk to an Indonesian, they think Indonesia is the whole world. And Americans are the same thing. British people are the same thing. That, my family in London think the UK is a massive market, right? I'm from LA, and you think America is a massive market. But then you come to Dubai and you see the confluence of so many different cultures, 2 billion people in 4 hours, as we used to say.
Did you hear about it and then you came, or were you already here, or like how did the business?
So Dubai has always had that brand, that it is the trading outpost of the world.
But for raising capital as well?
You convince capital to follow you, right? So
that's interesting.
So, for me, coming to Dubai, connected to Pakistan, connected to Turkey, Bangladesh, Philippines, Indonesia, Nigeria, all within 6 hours flight.
So glad to have seen someone coming with, UK, US, all the way from W.
No, but that's what Dubai has, right? And I think the one thing I can tell you from the American dream, why it resonates with the Dubai dream, just comes down to one thing, that here His Highness has that approach of, we want to be number one globally. Well, I tell you, man, that in this part of the world, in Africa and Asia, that mentality is scarce. Rarely will you get someone who says, I'm from Karachi, Pakistan, and I want to be number one. If they say they want to be number one, they want to be number one selling biryani in Karachi. But I'm like, bro, be number one, sell your biryani, but be number one globally. But that mindset, I think it's shared in Dubai. And I think the people who have the good fortune of coming to Dubai who cannot go to America, these days you can't go to America. You can no longer as easily go to the UK. They see that here.
I went to school here. I grew up in Dubai. My father Emirati, and when I was going to, all of a sudden he comes to me one day. I remember I was 12 years old. He says, "We're going on the plane tomorrow to a place called America. You're going to live there for 1 year and you're going to learn to speak English. Go there for a year." I went to a public school.
Where'd you go?
I went to Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth. I'm sitting with these people in class, first day of class, put your hand up. The teacher says, "Nobody knows you. Come to the front of the class. Here's a globe. Show us, what is this UAE in Dubai?" This is 20 years ago. I go to the map, I see Kuwait and Iraq because of the war, but I don't see the UAE. And, I flip then the globe, I find it, I say here today. I'm sitting with an American on a table saying, "I want to do business in Dubai." And in Dubai, we're having this conversation. Can you imagine for me, forget the tallest tower. It's a power vision. You attract also. And if you can find the best people, you create the best companies, then you want to stay in that place, right? And that's kind of, I think, the mentality I grew up with. When I grow up and I see a road can become from 2 lanes to 9 lanes, the Sheikh Zayed Road, anything's possible. If I'm sitting on a table with so many different nationalities, that anything is possible. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
I was chatting to my sister and my brother. He lives in San Francisco, and we were sort of saying, is the American empire going to change over this century like the British Empire did in the 20th century? In 1905, people weren't sure if the US would grow as much as it did. They weren't sure because UK was so powerful back then, but it wasn't so sure. And now there's some people will debate the US is too big, it's too big, it's too big. But people really know that the global south, if you look at projections of the economies, 8 of the top 10 global economies in 2080 will be global south. 8 of the top 10, so when people are saying what's the new superpower, well, that's it. It's multipolar economies, very few investments outside America. He just goes bet in America, and I think you should just bet on this region. For me, that drives me, and also the fact that no one's done it, the fact that any media, Walt Disney didn't do anything in the Middle East. Why not?
Actually, I see one commonality which I like a lot, that in under 500, Lovin Dubai, the name itself, I think is very powerful, right? And obviously, both of you came to that name in 2 different ways. But just as a final thought, famous Shakespearean question, what's in a name? Just kind of want to hear your thoughts. How powerful was that name? How powerful is that brand?
I had an excellent co-founder. He had a branding agency. It was his magic. He came up with the name, and I fell in love with his work and how he came to that name so much that we decided. Lovin Dubai, I personally want to know, how did you come up with the name?
Well, my friend had Love in Dublin, and what worked was that sort of proud of where you're from. It became more than a name because it became a media lens. It became an editorial stance. When Western journalists would come here and criticize.
And I just love the positivity.
Yeah. And it suits the Islamic world. It suits the media guidelines for the region. It suits what we're trying to do. It's, yes, we do local news, and sometimes there's debate and there's comments, but from a mindset, we're going to defend where we are. If someone criticizes, no, you're wrong. We love our home. And that works. That works. You can hire people in every country who's going to be proud of where they are. It works in Saudi, works in Egypt, works everywhere. So the name becomes something that steers the content, as well as being something that somehow worked more than what was there. It's sometimes hard to get, and I think Under 500 had it as well.
What about Smashi?
It was a working name. I used to love football as a kid. I used to collect loads of football magazines, 442, Match Magazine, all these magazines. And my cousins would come over from Liverpool and I'd say, let's play footy. In Ireland, we call it soccer. In America, it's soccer. So I wrote a magazine when I was 10, Smash Footy. And that's where Smashi comes from, Smashi. And now we're live sports mainly. We have Smashi Business as a podcast, newsletter, and social. But what drives the subscription is 600 games of local sports. So there's 12,000 users on that app. Not a lot, but I'm, again, trying to make streaming work. And I know the Smashi Sports has the potential of being like a DAZN or a Netflix for local sports in the region. Like taking on the incumbent TV stations who can no longer afford to send OB trucks to the games because we use AI cameras. But that all comes from, like, I love sports, so I'm passionately going to chase that in the region, and I love what's happening in sports in the region.
So for the aspiring entrepreneurs who are watching us right now, who are working on potentially the next multi-million-dollar business here in the UAE, what would your advice be to them?
Don't take advice from someone who hasn't done the thing that you want to do already. And to me, that always worked in my life. To understand that it's not your father and not your cousin and not your mom and not those people around you. They want to protect you and will probably tell you not to do it. So find someone that did it and ask them. That's my advice.
I think you need to be pragmatic about situations. What do you want to do? Do you want to come up with a big idea? Okay, come on. Anyone can do that. Do you want to run a big company? You need a bit of experience. So it depends what you want to do. If you want to come up with a big idea, raise a lot of money and hire someone to run the company, it's very hard to do everything. It's a combination. I got experience first, and then I sort of used that goat mountain idea of going up to the top of a mountain and chatting to all the greatest of all time and putting those photos on your wall. I have 7 photos on my wall of people who've done something similar, and that's where I constantly get advice. I just consume loads of material about those people. And, that experience and gut instinct, and then you're good.
Richard and Mahmoud, it has been an absolute pleasure. There have been so many leadership lessons in this conversation. Thank you so much for taking our time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.